everybody, and welcome to another Friday Night Live show. Travis has rejoined us. He was on vacation for a while, but he is now back. So let's just dive into the topic that Travis and I were dishing about before we actually started the live show, which is, should the Cybertruck be as funky as it is, and is it a problem?
Yeah, there's no argument that it's funky, right? And some people are going to be all on board with it, and some people are going to hate its guts for even existing. And my whole argument here is that I don't think there's a next step for the Cybertruck. And that's where, from a product planning perspective, we just filmed an episode of the podcast a little earlier, and we talked about how long it takes to develop a product and how long that lifespan is supposed to be for the product. Tesla has had incredibly long lifespans for each of its vehicles so far. That Cybertruck, I don't think there's a version 2 in the works right now that's going to either be like true to Cybertruck or more conventional. And that's where the big question mark for me is where do you go from the next version of Cybertruck? Because there's a lot of money that went into it.
They could wait for it. Just off the wall, totally off base thought here. They could paint it next time.
Oh, that'd be the big upgrade. The one more thing.
Yeah. But wait. But no, my whole argument is that Cybertruck needed to be weird, because if it didn't look the way that it does, why would you buy it over any other truck? If it looked like a truck and felt like a truck and walked like a truck and all that, then with the same specification set, then it would charge slower than most. Admittedly, that seems to be fixing itself. But at this moment, Silverado EV still charges faster. It goes further. Everything else is, some way or another better. They're bigger, they hold more, they have a spare tire, they have this, they have that. There are sales advantages for literally everything over the Cybertruck, except that the Cybertruck is a Tesla and looks weird. Like that's its go-to thing.
Right, but is there a Cybertruck 2? Like, because that body is so unique and the frame and the structure are just different, is there a Cybertruck 2?
Does there need to be, though? At least for the moment. Like, does it matter for the success of Cybertruck for 7 years? Because you made the point that you think sales are going to crash.
I think there's a pretty hard cap just based on its design, and that's where, just from the business perspective, that's the one I struggle with the most. Do something weird, do something funky. I get that. But as still, somewhat a fledgling company, they sell 4 total vehicles, right? For this fifth vehicle to have such a hard cap just feels like a questionable decision. And if it was easy enough to take those panels off and make it a more conventional or a more functional or whatever it is truck, I just feel like it's so unique that those changes are not going to be as easy to do as a year-over-year Ram truck,
Replacing the panels would be easy because they aren't structural at all. They're just glued to the unibody because it's an aluminum unibody with the stainless steel panels. But then I would argue the question then would be, do you trade huge initial interest, lots of buzz, millions and millions of dollars of free advertising? Do you trade that for what would have been news articles saying Tesla's the also-ran, why wouldn't you just buy the other truck? Nothing is great about it. Except for the charging network. And so then you'd have maybe a less initial interest, less free marketing, and a gradual sales rollout instead of what still definitely is a people clamoring for that thing, even though they're having some issues. There's some teething problems, just like we see with any new product, right? But like those
and
are
when the
definitely
less expensive
issues.
ones come out, the pickup will increase as well. So,
but I think that some of the and it's like the teething troubles that we see are almost not an issue to the early adopters because they're after the style, the wow, the crazy, the this, that. So that's the audience that will totally forgive that. But if you had a very normative truck that was just like Ford Ranger electric, would that audience be as forgiving if it didn't look special?
It's a question that'll have to wait for the answer,
Yeah.
But I'll be around.
Yeah. Let's move on to our first question here. So Dave is asking, can we get an update on when we will review the Lucid Air, especially the Pure model? So this is something we actually have been working on. I don't have any exact dates yet, but I would suspect before the end of the year, we should have a video on the Lucid Air. Lucid has been kind of in an interesting position because they have some very powerful and wealthy backers, but Lucid themselves, they don't seem to have a lot of cash at the moment, and that seems to be playing out in their advertising and press fleet budget. So we probably will end up renting a Lucid, is my guess. It's probably the way we're going to end up reviewing it. Lucid has been really betting a lot on the Gravity, and that's, I think, the make it or break it product for Lucid is going to be that Gravity model. I mean, I think that the Lucid looks great inside and out, and the efficiency is fantastic. I also really appreciate the engineering behind it, but nobody's buying a sedan.
No, I mean, we're just talking about volume, and SUVs are going to be the volume product. So it makes sense there's a lot of push towards that Gravity. Hopefully there's a lot of push towards that Gravity.
Yeah, I mean, except Travis. Travis bought a sedan. So there you go. There is
you know why?
one.
Because there wasn't a hatchback, and I just didn't need an SUV.
Yep.
I settled.
Here is a good one here. Kevin Buckley is asking, what are our thoughts on the GX550? You have a Defender 90. Is it worth the upgrade? You were with me at the Land Cruiser launch, right? What do you think about the GX550, especially given some of, I mean, admittedly, this doesn't impact every version of every Lexus and Toyota product, but given some of the issues they've had with their powertrains lately?
In a vacuum, I really enjoy the GX. It's a handsome vehicle. It was comfortable enough. It was a little tightly sprung. The space in it's pretty usable. You know, it's nice and squared off, and it does have quite a few off-road features. Is it an upgrade over a Defender 90? A lot of that kind of depends on what you're looking for, but it is what we've talked about is that it's a different Lexus experience than people have come to know and expect. So it is different in that way. And it's a lot closer to the Land Cruiser, I think maybe than it ought to be. You know, it's a very nice Land Cruiser, but
I mean, they always have been, to be honest.
Yes, but it doesn't distinguish itself incredibly far from that Land Cruiser model.
Right. And I think in a weird sort of way, I think this generation product is a bit more of an issue for that person that wants more differentiation. Because previously, the two models that were like one another was the LX and the Land Cruiser, and they sold in much smaller volume. And now we have a much higher volume of product that shares directly. Because GX was always the Land Cruiser Prado internationally, but in North America, we only got the GX. We never got the baby Land Cruiser. Now we get only the baby Land Cruiser, and then the two different flavors of Lexus Land Cruiser. To your point, my big problem with the GX550 was that it just doesn't look special enough anymore. It looks very, not discount necessarily, but more industrial than it had in the past. Like no real wood trim. The dashboard plastics just don't scream luxury the way that, honestly, the previous generation LX, I think, did. I think the previous generation LX and Land Cruiser both did a better job of looking like a Lexus than this actual Lexus.
Right. Things are nice. Are they really nice? Yeah.
Let's see. Let's move on to an interesting technical question. Your comment on DCTs versus planetary automatics in terms of shift quality and speed. At a glance, they'd have the same shift speed since they just swapped clutches to shift. This is an interesting point because the clutch shifting mechanism is quite different between these two transmissions. So in a DCT, it's essentially two transmissions. That's probably the big thing to remember, is that modern dual clutch transmissions. What makes them dual clutch is that the clutch module is very manual transmission-like, only it shifts from A to B. So transmission A to transmission B internally. And a regular automatic transmission has multiple clutches. It's not a single clutch that closes on the planetary gear sets. So with a DCT or a manual transmission, you can have very harsh transmission engagements, especially if it's a dry clutch, a traditional dry clutch, because transmission A is in first gear, transmission B is in second gear. So there are no other elements to shift. The clutch simply flops from here to over there. First is disengaged, second is rapidly engaged. in an automatic transmission, because the clutches are much smaller physically, so there's a lot less clutch area inside a traditional automatic transmission, and there are multiple clutches to open and close. There's also a torque converter involved. What happens inside a regular automatic transmission is that the torque converter will uncouple its clutch. So there's one clutch that has to open inside. Then the torque converter is doing its usual fluid coupling thing. Then, generally speaking, engine output has to get reduced because the clutches inside the transmission are not designed for high torque applications upon open or close. So torque gets reduced, clutches then open or close inside the transmission because it's often a combination. One clutch has to open, the other one has to close because there are multiple gear sets inside a conventional automatic transmission, especially a modern, 9, 10-speed automatic. And then once that is done, then the torque converter can go back into lockup. So a modern automatic transmission, pretty much everything currently on sale that has an automatic, the torque converter is generally only used during gear changes, initial acceleration in first gear, or sometimes if lockup clutch is detected, then it may just open that clutch and just use the torque converter. But generally speaking, they're locked most of the time. So that's the key difference why DCTs can be so much faster, because it's a more simple clutch movement and it's just the one clutch. Generally speaking, it's hard to get exact numbers on this, but generally speaking, a dual clutch transmission should be able to do a sequential shift up or a sequential shift down in less than 25 milliseconds. Some of the fastest automatic transmissions out there are more like 80 to 100 milliseconds, so it's a reasonable amount faster. Some of the faster automatics are the weird Mercedes multi-clutch transmission, which I think is the dumbest marketing thing ever, honestly, because every transmission is a multi-clutch, more than one clutch going on. But in the Mercedes thing, all they do is they take a regular automatic, so you have all the disadvantages of a regular automatic, and then they take out the one thing that makes the automatic smooth, the torque converter. They just delete it, and you get a single clutch there. So in that instance, it does speed up some of this because it can open and close that single clutch faster, and it opens that, then there's no torque movement. That's the key to their faster shifting. So instead of reducing engine torque output, the Mercedes MCT eliminates it because it opens the clutch. Then the transmission can then shift very rapidly its internal gear sets, then it closes the clutch again. So you do have that speed improvement for shifts, but the downside is that you actually have much worse initial shift quality from 0 to like 5 miles per hour. Like that really low speed crawl tends to be very poor in a Mercedes MCT, just due to the clutch design and the gear ratios involved in those transmissions. So moving along, let's thank, I have no idea how we pronounce your screen name here for the super chat here, and then we'll move on to this question here. I'm bad at pronunciation. So given the continued rise of subscription-based options where a perpetual monthly fee can unlock a feature, is there any scenario where this subscription could benefit customers? What do you think, Travis?
There's definitely an argument to where it benefits. Upfront cost, if you're subscribing to something, it's a monthly payment versus a cash upfront. Obviously, one of the more controversial ones was the heated seats in the BMW. But instead of paying the $2,000 option up front, you pay the pick a number. I don't remember what it was, but $50 a month. Well, that's easier on the wallet. And if you're rotating vehicles, there's in theory where every 3 years you swap it out and you paid a lot less in that 3 years for the subscription than you would have the feature. But then, and I haven't done the math, but then you also don't have the feature to sell on the vehicle to the next owner. So there's definitely a way it makes sense. Other things, I guess, like performance upgrades. Those are other. I mean, those are software. They're not really designed to be turned on and off. But in theory, there's a subscription service on the way for that, where you say, "Hey, it's the fun weekend trip, and I want to go ahead and juice this thing up, and then turn it back down." So there's flexibility. Is it best? I don't know. I like the option. I would like to be able to either purchase my heated seats at once or do a subscription. If we want to do it that way, I'm more okay with it.
I am somewhat unconventional in that I don't necessarily mind the subscriptions. it depends on how they're structured and what the subscription is for. Based mostly on the logic of, if you don't want the feature when you buy the car, but maybe you want the feature later, then it makes sense. The heated seat thing specifically is kind of funky because I actually don't mind that one necessarily either. It does give the car company the ability to make more money in the long run. The incremental cost of including the heated seat and everything is much less than the cost that they would bill you to put the heated seat on the car. And then, of course, it means that there's one warranty component throughout the entire lineup. So if everything gets a heated seat, whether you bought the heated seat or not, then all they have to do is inventory one warranty seat, right? So that way everything has that function. It also allows the person that's in Florida to not pay for that, but then the secondary market person that wants to buy that Florida car in Maine, then they can turn on the heated seat if they want to. I think it should be you can subscribe for something or you can pay for it. I would prefer the option to pay for it up front. You also have the ability to include that feature in your loan or your lease if you buy or lease the car that way. And maybe you can't afford some of these options, but then you could turn them on later, that kind of thing. So I kind of get it from some standpoint. The more common application for this these days seems to be the ability to software unlock additional performance in electric vehicles or extra range in some electric vehicles, things like that. And I know people are offended by that, but that also makes logical sense to me, because if you as a manufacturer have designed a 10 kilowatt hour buffer into your electric vehicle or some specific restrictions on motor performance, oftentimes that's done for profitability reasons. They know that if you allowed crazy performance, which can be done in any EV, I mean, you could have practically any EV shred the tires off or whatever you wanted, but then that presents a warranty and drivability issue. The more power, the more likely these things are to wear and advance and break and whatever. But if you can charge the customer for that, then they get to decide, do I want the performance or do I want the less expensive to maintain thing long term? So that's, I'm a little bit less conventional on that front, I think.
And the one thing I will say is that the customers will decide if this happens moving forward. Now, the decision is made by new car buyers, which is not the majority of car shoppers. But if new car buyers don't see a problem with it, then it'll happen. And that means the second, third, fourth owner is going to end up paying that subscription. And that's where they might be a little upset for the $50 option on the $5,000 car they bought, years and years down the road. That's a percentage difference that's going to be more significant than the $50,000 car that they bought.
And in the United States, we haven't seen too much of this, to be honest, because the heated seat thing was only Europe, as I recall. I believe they never tried that here. Here they tried the CarPlay thing, and then they walked it back. They were like, never mind, CarPlay for everybody.
Here you go.
So, yeah. We'll skip this super chat. We'll be back to you just a second, Tyrannical, because this actually goes with this. Toyota remote start subscription. Why? Because it has to have a cellular modem on the car. So if you're remote starting via cell modem, then that subscription has to work. The Toyota remote start subscription on vehicles is not through the key fob. That's not that remote start. Toyota, as I recall, does not do remote start on the key fob in anything new that I can think of. They do remote start via your smartphone app. So your smartphone app has to have a cellular contract on the car. That data has to be paid, and that's why you have to pay for that service longer term. So,
and I had that issue with an Audi. I had a nice Audi, and that feature was available, but I sure as hell wasn't going to pay $15 a month to do it. It was just that's all I was going to use it for.
And that's where I will say that some car companies are now including some of those connected services for a long time. So Hyundai and Genesis are now providing connected services for the lifetime of the vehicle for the first owner, bearing in mind that the first owner doesn't normally keep their car for that long. So easy give, right? And Chevy is doing it, all of General Motors actually is doing it in electric vehicles only for 8 years. So if you buy a Blazer EV or whatever, you get 8 years of that service. If you buy a regular whatever, I think it's maybe a year, something like that, trial subscription, maybe even shorter than that.
I'd say within the 3-year window for sure.
Yeah. Let's move back to Tyrannical's question. Why don't you read that off for us?
Yeah, a Volkswagen dealer, I assume, near us is offering an Atlas Cross Sport SE Tech with sunroof for $5,500 under MSRP, bringing it from 46.5 to 41. Is this a good deal in your eyes? It depends. Are you looking for a cross sport?
I like the Cross Sport, actually. I think, especially the refreshed Cross Sport, I think its interior is significantly nicer than the Passport. In that segment, you are definitely looking at kind of a weird group of competitors. We have the Murano, which is really old. It is expected to be replaced soon, although we don't know any confirmation or any even estimates on when that will be, just sort of next year or two kind of thing on the timeline. Murano's probably going to get a second life. We have seen manufacturers give up on this segment. Toyota has kind of halfway re-entered it with the Signia, but it's not really the same thing. And then we have the Ford Edge, which is dead, and a Grand Cherokee, which is not the same thing at all. Much more expensive, more off-road focused, etc. So I have always liked the promise of that format of vehicle. Oh, and it's worth noting the Santa Fe has turned into something very different, so it's no longer there either. But I like the format because you get a much bigger back seat than you get in the Tiguan. It's bigger, it's wider, more headroom, more legroom, etc. And you get significantly more cargo room as well. So I think that's actually a pretty solid deal.
Yeah, I mean, anything under MSRP is usually a pretty good deal. The only thing for me is that what you're shopping for? And if it is, then what you wanted just got less expensive, and that's always a good deal.
Yeah, Volkswagen has had some pretty decent discounts off MSRP. They saw sales go up really quite nicely in recent memory, but then this year they've had some issues moving some of the products. I think that's why we're starting to see a little bit more cash on the hood. But that's definitely a benefit to some shoppers.
Yeah.
Let's move on here to another hybrid system question here. Thoughts on Honda's latest hybrid system with the 2 mechanical gear ratios? Doesn't seem to improve fuel efficiency, and towing is still not great. The one important thing to know with the 2-speed gear set that has been added to Honda's hybrid transmission is that it actually was not intended to improve fuel economy. It was simply there to improve 0 to 60 launches, sort of that initial gear launch, and towing primarily. It does not always get used. So the 2-speed unit allows the transmission to select a different low speed ratio whenever it may be needed, but that doesn't mean it's used every day when you're driving around. It just sort of depends on the general conditions, whether you're hill climbing, doing this, that, etc. And when they were targeting towing, it's important to remember it did improve significantly. It's just not great, because it went from 0 to 1,500 pounds. So infinite increase. The competition doesn't really tow that much more. And the average small crossover owner doesn't usually tow much either. So the rationale for Honda, they said at this point in time, was that their plan was to give people confidence that they could tow tiny trailers or put their bicycle on the back or this or that. Apparently, in their research, a large number of customers that simply wanted to carry a bicycle or something mounted on a hitch, that's not really a trailer, in their minds, they were afraid of using the CRV hybrid or other hybrids in the Honda lineup because the towing capacity was 0, and they thought that was towing, and it's not. And so they said giving it some towing capacity. Yeah, so they said giving it some towing capacity kind of helps those customers feel better about what they want to do with the car.
Right. I mean, I think for better or worse, people tend to overrate their tow vehicle. And I'm not talking about big trailers. I'm talking about, maybe it's a little teardrop. Maybe it's a little trailer with some bikes on it. Pretty small stuff. People want to go, if it's a 2,000-pound trailer, I got to have a SUV for that. When you don't really have to, you can. So 1,500 seems fine to me.
Yep. Let's move along to the Ridgeline and Pilot. Legion is asking, do we think Ridgeline and Pilot will get beefy off-road models like the upcoming Passport? The interesting question that we don't know, because mind you, I'm assuming you're talking about the 2026 next generation Passport. We don't know exactly what kind of off-roading Honda is going to target, but we do know that it's not going to be a radical mechanical departure from the Pilot. There are no indications that it's going to move to a rear-wheel drive platform or a body-on-frame kind of design, etc. It looks, by all indications, prepared to be wrong here, mind you, but looks by all indications that it's going to be basically the same platform as Pilot, same Honda iVTM4 system, also known as super handling all-wheel drive. There are likely to be some software modifications and possibly some extra cooling changes to super handling all-wheel drive for that model. And, bigger off-road tires, things like that, more protection.
Wheel arches.
Yeah, but don't expect anything radical on the Passport. Logically, because Honda doesn't need to. They're selling as many Pilots and Passports as they can build, and by and large, that customer is not taking that kind of vehicle that heavy off-road. And if they do, they buy a Grand Cherokee, and it doesn't seem like it's worth it to Honda to build such a unique vehicle that would never get used. There are
it's like
pros.
It's like the Forester, Wilderness and the Passport Trail Sport are not competing with the 4Runner,
right?
So they don't need to compete with the 4Runner or a Grand Cherokee or fill in the blank. They're soft roaders. That's what they're built for.
And I do get that question a lot. Good thing you brought up the 4Runner, because that's something I forgot to mention here. So, I mean, a lot of people are asking, why is it that Toyota has so many crazy body-on-frame trucks right now? Well, keep in mind that Toyota does command a higher MSRP for those vehicles. And the Honda shopper, their price range has been historically much narrower than Toyota's pricing ladder. So it's much easier to buy a much more expensive Toyota. But Toyota also has a high volume internationally and domestically of body-on-frame vehicles. So they have Tundra, they have Tacoma, Sequoia, 4Runner, Land Cruiser, the Prado thing internationally, LX, the full-size Land Cruiser, etc. All these vehicles are all based on common body-on-frame componentry in this generation. Toyota went hard on parts commonality, which is actually why some of the Toyota body-on-frame vehicles are kind of compromised. It's why Sequoia doesn't have an independent rear suspension anymore. It's why the interiors are kind of basic here and there, why Land Cruiser and GX have some funny interior part sharing. And Honda does not have that kind of product to fall back on. So the much smaller manufacturer, much lower volume, no trucks to fall back on, etc. And a general desire not to make the same sort of engineering agreements with other companies that we've seen in the past. Prologue accepted there, of course. On the why they don't have second row bench seats, this is an interesting question. They don't have really good answers, because I did ask this, a lot of people did. The two answers that we did get, which sort of makes sense but probably don't tell the whole picture, is the first one, they think that customers don't want it, which I think is incorrect. I think that customers do want it. They're saying that the top end, that the Trail Sport buyer tends to be a more premium shopper, and they tend to prefer captain's chairs. Generally speaking, supposedly don't have as many young children in the family on average as the lower end Pilot shopper. The other thing that seems a little bit more logical is payload capacity. So the vehicle is designed for a particular payload envelope, and by the time they've added the skid plates and this and that and whatever else to the vehicle, it may be just too far beyond that payload envelope for them to logically think they should put another seat in it. That's a little bit more logical and rational to me, at any rate. Moving along here, Drew is asking, can someone give me the Genesis on the Murano X Cross Cabriolet? What type of vehicle is able to get sweet? Oh, this actually is kind of funny.
Go for it, Alex.
So supposedly, the reason that we have the Cross Cabriolet is because one of the high-level executives, I don't remember whether it was the president's wife, someone way up there in the nosebleed section wanted one, and that's why they did it. And that's also why it was so half-baked, because nobody else down the product lineup really wanted one. We should be able to get a Nissan person on record for the Cross Cabriolet, because
we probably can.
We probably can, because it seems like a lot of the Nissan people are like that thing.
Oh,
And so,
that.
but there is one. This is fun. So we may do this at some point. I have received an offer from the guy that runs the Nissan Heritage Museum in Smyrna that if I fly to Smyrna, I can drive one, but I cannot move the top up or down. The top must stay down, because apparently the top may go up, but it may not go down. And
so it stays down.
So it stays down, because apparently the failure rate is 100%. Like, there's no question about it. All the tops will go wrong. It's simply a matter of how long it will take. I guess because this person's wife wanted one and they designed this half-baked thing, they, of course, had to put it into production to make the finances work. And that left them, and it was like a real rush job. So they like went to some top manufacturer that had made like 5 convertible tops in their life, and were like, we need this, and we need it cheap, and we need it right now, because so-and-so wants the convertible right now. And that's how it all went down. Yeah, not great. Let's move along here. Does the upcoming Passport look like the newer version of the old boxy Pilot? It does not exactly. They have only shown us a little bit of a teaser, so hopefully we will see more later.
Silhouette.
It looks, honestly, let me see if can we actually share this here? We might be able to share it here. Share screen. Let's see here. This is what it looks like. It honestly gives me Pilot vibes. What do you think?
Yeah, the front there definitely reminds me of not the original, but that really boxy version of the Pilot. But in profile, I'd have to see how curvy or you know, how true to form does that stay. From the front, I mean, I'm on board. And I actually love that generation of Pilot, but we'll just have to wait and see.
I'm really eager to see exactly what Passport turns into, because Pilot does not seem to be selling as well as they might like. So Pilot has really fallen down the sales charts quite a lot, even in this new version. We shouldn't really be too surprised, because I don't think it's actually necessarily a thing that's wrong with the Pilot. I think it's that other companies finally started giving customers what they wanted, because the Koreans, it took them a real long time to give anybody a decently sized 3-row. Toyota finally figured it out. Toyota finally was like, this Highlander's doing well, but customers keep demanding something bigger.
More.
They got a bigger Grand Highlander, and guess what? Highlander sales suck. Have you seen lately what Highlander sales are doing?
I haven't looked, no.
They're really, really bad. Let's see here. So 2022, actually let's go 2021. Even in pandemic recovery mode, where other sales were still pretty bad in 2021, Toyota sold 264,000 Highlanders. Even in the midst of the pandemic, they sold 212,000 Highlanders. Including last month, they sold about 60,000 Highlanders so far this year. And the answer the answer to why is Grand Highlander, because Grand Highlander has been flying off the shelves. And even though they can't build enough of them, let's see if I can find the sales numbers here for Grand Highlander. But even though they're still production constrained in Grand Highlander, they have been selling about, it's like they're up to 12,000 Grand Highlanders a month. And so the sales have just totally flip-flopped. And Grand Highlander probably, if I'm a betting man, I would bet that next year Grand Highlander might be the #1 seller in the segment, because Highlander just fell off the charts. Just, it's gone.
You're telling me that in the US we want bigger cars?
We want bigger.
Is that what I'm hearing? Okay. All right. I'm gonna make a note of that. That's surprising.
And then of course we got Telluride, which was a #3, and now I think might actually be #2 in the segment. The numbers bop around a lot. But Telluride came up out of nowhere, beat the socks off a Pilot because it's bigger. And then Palisade is selling incredibly well. The combination of those two sells well. We have the new GM.
We're getting new versions coming.
Yeah. And we're going to get the new Buick soon, and the new Cadillacs, actually quadruplets, because there's the Caddy in there too. So we're getting those pretty soon.
And those should do fairly well.
Yeah, that Traverse was actually honestly pretty impressive. Although I think the Acadia
Yeah.
is better looking, inside and out, mind you.
I'm looking forward to seeing the Enclave in person, but I think I'd probably lean towards the Acadia myself.
Yeah, the Enclave is a little too bubbly for me, I would say.
I'm giving it a chance till I see it in person, but yeah, it's different.
I think the exterior is hideous. It looks like one of those cartoon babies from the 1960s with cartoon teeth. Because they just took took all the other Buicks and stretched it vertically.
Right.
The interior, some of the shapes are a little funky, but I was honestly impressed by the interior design outside of the instrument cluster shape. The color combos are good. They got that really cool navy and ivory thing going on. Bunch of other cool color combinations. Nice feature set. It's probably going to be well priced. All the new Buicks have been really quiet. Let's move along here because I saw one good question here from Car Guy 11. Does Mach-E suffer from the same slow charging as the Blazer? Not on a 150 kilowatt charger. Our Mach-E had no problems actually on those chargers, but they all charge relatively slow. So, charge rates on the Mach-E are kind of low still. And the base battery pack in the Mach-E charges so slow that actually it doesn't really matter. I forget how fast your Model 3, it's 520 kilowatts peak, something like that, right?
My Model 3 is, I think it's 177. And that's the
they raised it. Oh, it's right, because it's not 277 or 250.
correct.
It's
So I'm
170. Okay.
I'm the base model. I've got limited, but it's still 177.
Yeah, okay.
70-ish.
Let's look this up here because a lot of people actually have given like the BZ4X, some of those others, a really hard time for their charge curve. But the Mach-E, here we go. Standard range battery is 110 kilowatts. So
Yeah.
it's not overly speedy, but I would argue that it doesn't seem to really matter because people don't really DC fast charge their cars very often.
Yeah.
So
I will tell you, I had a 500E, and I think that was 85 kilowatts. That was a little slow.
Yeah.
That was crawling along.
Yeah. The Mach-E's battery pack has a much higher core voltage than the base battery in the Blazer and the only battery in the Equinox. Blazer's issue is not exclusive to Blazer, but the scale of the problem is actually really exclusive to Blazer because pretty much everything else out there is solidly over 350 volts when charging. The Blazer EV has a very, very low starting voltage when charging because its nominal capacity when the battery is fully charged is under 300 volts. And I cannot think of another EV that's under 300 volts that's currently in production. I don't remember. 500E could be, but who cares? It doesn't charge. They're not going to sell any of them.
Right.
Not
none.
Yeah, any major attempt at a volume EV, let's put it that way. And that's why I kind of am curious because GM wants to sell a ton of these things.
Right. Well,
and that could be the most popular battery.
There's trade-offs, right? But to your point, people aren't going to be DC fast charging that much, but when you do, you don't want to sit there frustrated. So it's an interesting balancing act because even though it's not going to be used often, when you do use it, you don't need to be suffering through it. Yeah.
And I will say that the bigger battery in the Blazer and the only battery in the Lyriq don't have that problem at all. They charge pretty quickly. We charged the Lyriq today at an EV Go station, and I was actually able to data log it, which is kind of cool. I found an OBD2 data logger that will actually let you see current in the battery temperature and voltage, etc.
Oh, very cool.
And in the Lyriq, it's still hitting the 500 amp limit, but its voltage is high enough that it can hit 182 kilowatts, something like that. And its charge curve is really quite linear. So because at that charge rate, you are stuffing actually less power per module into the battery versus the smaller battery pack. It's actually a little bit more gentle on the battery, so it doesn't have that charge dip off that we find in the Blazer EV. Lots of lots of people are wondering, what's going on with the charge curves here and there. There's so many factors in play that
like temperature, right? I mean,
temperature, which charger using all that,
preconditioning,
you just have to just sort of relax and know that it's not going to be the quoted time in pretty much any EV, if not just because of the extra time in finding the station and plugging in, but also the fact that there may be a wait at the station. There has to be some allowance for this in the current scheme of things with EVs, whether we're talking about a Tesla or not. I mean, I was actually shocked. I arrived at the EV Go station and nobody else was there. But by the time I left, it was packed and there were 3 people waiting. So just how these things go. Let's move on here to find one of these other questions I saw hanging out in the list here. This is an interesting one. Do transverse engines have a lower center of gravity than longitudinal layouts? This is an interesting question, actually. It does not appear so. And I think it's because of the relative positioning of the front axle and just the packaging of the engine. I think that entire vehicle put together, center of gravity does have a benefit from a longitudinal layout simply because of the transmission's positioning there. And because there's more room on the side of the engine bay, they can position accessories more laterally and lower in the engine bay, and things have to be kind of upright in a transverse vehicle.
Yeah, I mean, I like the thinking. It's just it's not just the engine; it's the rest of the packaging that comes into play.
Hang here is asking our thoughts on the revised Acura RDX. Did you see that RDX reveal? You were on
no,
vacation.
I haven't seen it yet. Yeah, I'm still playing a little bit of catch up, but I haven't seen it yet.
You may be disappointed. What would you have liked to see in the new RDX? Let's start there.
I mean, by and large, I like the packaging on the RDX, so I can't think of anything more of a evolution than a revolution. Just a small upgrade, a little nip, a little tuck, something like that.
I mean, we were just in the MDX Type S, that got refreshed for this model year. Would you have rationally expected similar changes to the RDX? I guess is what I'm saying.
Yes. That would seem reasonable, right?
Would you have expected an RDX Type S to pop out of the woodwork?
No, not especially.
Oh, that's disappointing. I would have, because everybody else has.
I would love to see it. I mean,
they literally make an engine and transmission that would fit in there. But
sure.
Basically all they did was they gave us a teeny tiny little exterior tweak, a tweak to the interior software and screen, and it still has the evil trackpad thing. So like the one thing that they admitted that their customers asked for more than anything else, they did not do.
Trackpad.
Which was the no trackpad part. I was honestly surprised about that, but it does make me wonder in a way, and this is just totally out of my warped mind. Does this mean that a new RDX is maybe coming sooner than I thought?
That's what I'm saying. What's coming? If you're not putting a lot of money into the next, just the improvements, it might be because the R&D is elsewhere. So perhaps.
Yeah. Let's move on here to this one, which I think is actually an interesting question too. Which OEM do you think would actually offer a competitive sub $30,000 EV? Do we get to, Mike, comment down there. We'll interrupt ourselves when you reply. Comment down there. Are you including the federal tax credit or not? Like, do we have to talk about $30,000 EV without that? And then while you do that, we will move on to this CVT question and get back to you. So what do you think about CVTs there?
I don't have a problem with CVTs. I understand, especially the initial concern. And I will say that this applies to a lot of newer technologies, right? Is that the first run of something is often not the best run you're going to see of it. So I've had this conversation about like turbocharged engines. Well, the first turbos are not likely to be infinitely better than the, whatever iteration of a naturally aspirated engine. CVTs came out, they got a bad rap pretty quickly, and a lot of it was just because
Mhm.
of the way it made the engine sound. And it doesn't mean it was doing anything
Yep.
wrong or anything bad, but it was different. And I don't think one of the difficulties is that difference wasn't explained. It didn't say, "Hey, just so you know, here's what's happening, here's the why." But they're smoother, right? I mean, by
Yeah.
and large, it's a smoother, um,
And I blame a lot of
different
people in the
experience.
automotive press for that, to be honest, because even even a CVT vehicle now, you just get the same weird band of journalists complaining about it. And I hate
About
to
the same
throw my
thing
own
from
people under the
yeah.
bus, but you know what? I mean, you've been there in the group. I'm not pointing fingers, but there are a lot of people that are not the sharpest knife in the drawer. And you try and explain to them how it works, and they
How
don't
and
get it.
why?
Like,
Yeah.
at the launch of the Prius and Prius Prime, there were guys literally asking about the failure of Nissan CVTs and what Toyota's thought is about that and the durability of their CVT and why they think it's different. And you're like, it's not the same. Not only is it not the same company that makes them, it's not even a transmission in the normal sense of the word. Like, as
Right.
far as normal people think, that's not what's going on under the hood of a Prius. So, like, it was so out of left field and so bizarre that the engineer that was up there, long, incredibly pregnant pause, he didn't even know how to answer the question. But that is something that you see
Uh,
all the time, I would say,
yeah.
out
So
there.
so honestly, I'm on board with CVTs. It depends on what vehicle they're going in
Yes.
because it's about the driving experience. I don't know anybody who is buying an economy type car who's looking for a sports car experience.
Right.
Well, they might try to make it a sports car experience, and I don't
Hmm.
blame them, but they know they're not getting a sports car. So if
Right.
you're coming from a well, an older manual shifting 911 and you hop in a CVT, of course it's going to be a disappointing experience
Yep.
because you're missing the engagement and the feel
Hmm.
of the shift. And but yeah, that's the whole point.
And it
I
sort of
drive an
depends on
electric
how they're
car most of the
designed
time.
too. It's
Right,
like
but
Nissan
my electric car doesn't
CVTs.
shift.
Right. But it's like Nissan CVTs, they have a peculiar feel. They don't shift terribly quickly, and they're the
Mhm.
source of the reliability issues that people complain about historically. We
Yeah,
don't know what their modern designs are like because it's too new. We really honestly do not know whether Nissan's current CVTs are going to be a reliability issue long term or not. Just don't know. But Honda's CVT is lovely. Like, their CVT shifts quickly. You put your foot on it, it shifts almost like an automatic. It feels much
right.
more
You're
normal.
moving. Here you go.
Subaru's not great. It's better than the Nissan one, not great. I'm very offended by its existence in the WRX. I think that thing is an abomination. It should just be burnt.
See, and that's the
Um,
sports car argument, right? Is
right.
obviously I know it's not a 911, but it's a different kind of
Yeah.
experience. Your
But I
minivan, throw
but I
CVT in
think
there, but
but see, I think that for the limited number of CVT sales that we see in a WRX, this could have been Subaru's opportunity to do something different with it. Because
hmm,
my biggest complaint with their CVT is that it's trying to not be a CVT and it's not doing a good job at it. It'd be like if I pretended to be French, I would not do a good job at it because I took 2 years of French and I remember nothing. De, oh, baguettes, right? Oh, like
right.
that's as good as I
Oui,
can get
oui.
after 2 years of French. I would not survive in Quebec or Paris, right? Just would not
Mhm.
work. And that's what the Subaru CVT is doing. And it's really bad at it. But had it just been a CVT, like a high strung CVT, where like you put it in sport mode, the moment you can get that engine up to 3,000 RPM, it just
Off it
stayed
goes.
at 3,000 RPM and just screamed its little
Yep.
nuts off. Then you'd have great passing power and it could be weird and
Yep.
novel, but at least it wouldn't be a bad imitation of what people wanted. And I
Right.
think
And I think
that's
that's
my
the other
problem
thing
with
about
it.
CVTs is that they try to make them feel like
Hmm.
regular transmissions, and all it did was make them worse. And
Yep.
so then there's more complaints about the CVT because they try to make it not CVT-ish.
Right. Because if we go back in history, there have been racing series, you can Google it, where CVTs were a thing for a while and they were really good. And that's part of why they're not used anymore. Because if you can
Hmm.
keep
Yeah,
your
yeah.
engine at its optimum power band all the time. So if you're on a track and your engine can just scream at 8,000 RPM, and that's where your peak power and relatively good torque numbers are happening right there at 8,000 RPM, as you come into a corner and you're slowing down, if you can vary that ratio, keep that engine at that speed, then the moment you leave the corner, you're producing maximum power at that moment. You don't have to
There's
wait for
no
anything
rev
to
up.
shift,
You're there.
right?
Yeah.
That's the promise of the CVT. And it's, you know, it's awkward there. I will say that a good balance is a dual clutch for me. Like you give up low speed crawl performance and hill climb performance, but you have an improved efficiency profile over an automatic. Generally, CVTs are better and they're less expensive than a dual clutch, but a dual clutch feels and drives better. So that's where I would go with that one. I will say on the CVT front, though, mind you, that for 90% of cars, 90% of buyers, I think CVTs are just fine. So I have no problem with it in a CRV or an Accord, any of the Honda products, the CVT, just fine. Clearly, Subaru has an entire business made of CVTs, and that's all they make practically. You know, I'm not the biggest fan of Nissan's or Toyota's CVT, but currently they seem to be fine. And for the average buyer, all are probably fine. But Mike here on this one says pre-tax credit for the sub $30,000 EV.
That obviously gets tougher. It really narrows the gap. I mean,
especially since as we go forward, the likelihood of anything selling for under $30,000 is kind of.
Yeah, I mean, we spent a lot of time at the end of last year looking at the affordable cars, and the list is getting smaller and smaller. And as we know, the cost of an EV right now is higher because we have two powertrain components, right? We have a battery and we have a motor. So that's going to increase the cost of everything. You know, something like the Chevy Bolt was the closest thing to an affordable option. And obviously the Equinox is close-ish, but it's not the same.
Equinox could get pretty close.
One of the first things that pops to me, honestly, is Hyundai. They've got the Kona EV. That's another option that's closer than many. I will tell you, the Fiat 500e is just over 30,000, and it's a very compromised machine.
That's the thing.
You know, for the entry level, and the trim that I was driving a couple weeks ago was about the same with the tax credit, although it's not that much different without now. From when I bought my Model 3. And let me tell you, the money's on the Model 3 if you're trying to do better in every category. So it's not cuter, but everything else. So I think you're looking at a Chevy or a Ford is going to have a chance to do it. Obviously, Ford doesn't have anything on the books right now.
I'm going to go with Ford. I'm sorry.
If you bring back like
General Motors. Sorry, General Motors. I'm going to go with General Motors on this guess. Volkswagen, I think, could do it if they wanted to, but they don't seem to be. I think if they brought the ID3 to the US, it could work. But Volkswagen does not seem interested in that segment.
No, they've had time. They aren't doing it.
General Motors does seem interested, and that's why I asked about the tax credit, because not only, and this is actually kind of the interesting thing about GM, is that GM has said they're super duper duper dedicated to keeping that tax credit and to North American manufacture, North American sourcing for as much as possible, supply chains within the free trade countries that the US works with, et cetera. So unlike Tesla, which has had models on and off that didn't qualify for the tax credit by design, honestly, because they were designing for batteries manufactured in China. That was why they lost the tax credit. GM has never actually been having Chinese battery manufacturing as a goal. The Ultium thing, the new direction for them has always been very centric on North America, not the US, mind you, for people that are wondering. US, Canada, Mexico. There's a whole lot of Canada, a whole lot of Mexico in the Ultium lineup. But that does put them in a position that is unique. So Ford, no Mach-E gets the tax credit. So MSRP right off the top, a lot of shoppers, the GM is going to be a lot less expensive than the Mach-E. And I don't think that situation is one that Ford had planned for initially. So they were initially assuming that their batteries would still qualify. And so they were not necessarily thinking about specifically North American manufacturing and targeting, whereas GM always had that in their design portfolio. And that's kind of why I am surprised that Stellantis, if you didn't notice this, Stellantis, we have some pricing information out on things. It looks like Charger will not get the tax credit at all. And it probably won't apply to Wagoneer either. Even though those batteries are going to be manufactured in Canada, it appears that they will not meet the requirements for Chinese sourcing. So that's a problem there.
For all the flack that GM has gotten, and I think they've earned a lot of it, they had a very top-down comprehensive plan on here's what we're doing for EVs, and their investment and their commitment to it has been kind of the double-edged sword, where there's so much here that they're in control of, and then when things go wrong, it's because they didn't handle it very well. So,
and competitive, I will also say that competitive tends to be a different definition for different people. And so, like on the GM side, what I mean by competitive is that after all the cash in the hood, because there's a lot of cash in the hood, you can get a Blazer EV, as we proved. You can get a Blazer EV for the same price or less than a regular Blazer, with very similar performance numbers, relatively similar interior dimensions. That's kind of a first. We've seen approaches from other manufacturers, but this is not only similarly priced, but less. In Equinox, it looks like it may be a similar calculus. We'll be driving the new Equinox soon, so stay tuned for our impressions on that. But Equinox gets pretty darn inexpensive after that tax credit, and there is still a cheaper model coming, and then theoretically Bolt will be cheaper than that for the subcompact segment.
But I will throw this out there. The next generation Bolt, I know people have been really excited about that. I don't think it's going to be that much cheaper than Equinox, because we're getting towards the diminishing returns there. So for folks who are looking for the next Bolt, number one, I don't think it's going to be nearly as small. It's not going to have that same compact feel.
No, it's not going to be small. We're pretty sure on that one.
Yeah, but it's also not going to be as inexpensive, or percentage wise as inexpensive as something like the Equinox. So I'm very curious. I'm very cautious on getting too excited about it.
My current guess is that it's probably going to be about $5,000 less than Equinox. It's probably where they're going to try and position it. It may or may not qualify for the federal tax credit. That is a little bit up in the air, because it won't be using NMC batteries. It will be using the next Ultium cycle of development, where they will have some different chemistries available. So it will be using LFP batteries by all accounts, because that will lower the cost considerably and some practicality for the users. But there really aren't very many LFP batteries built outside of China. So there are some, but unless there is some magical huge development in LFP production in North America, they won't be able to get that tax credit. Before we move on to the super chat question, we do have to add this one. Toyota CVT with the physical first gear. Not a big fan of Toyota's CVT with the physical first gear, to be honest. It has a funky feel to it. It does have one initial transmission shift, but overall, it doesn't change ratios as quickly as the Honda. And the Hondas don't need the physical first gear to have good performance and better shift quality. So I'm not a fan of that one. This is a good one here. How was Mazda able to develop a rear-wheel drive platform, but Honda, a much larger company, refused to pull the trigger to develop a rear-wheel drive? This is kind of fun inside baseball in a way, but two things at play. Mazda is the Japanese canary in the coal mine, right? They're the first one to have financial problems. They're not exactly financially that stable right now, to be honest. Mazda's factories in Japan tend to be kind of shabby chic. Let's put it that way. I mean, you go to a Honda factory and it's very modern, very new, all the latest things, right? And Mazda's kind of like, it's the budget factory.
We're here, we're doing it.
Right. And so a lot of that's kind of there. Mazda also tends to be, but I think that's a pro and a con in a way. Mazda tends to be like the scrappy upstart that needs to define themselves differently from the others. And that's one of the ways that they can do that, is to develop new platforms. We don't know how much money was shared between other car companies here. So remember that the Mazda Miata, this generation, was partially funded by FCA, Fiat Chrysler, before the Stellantis merger. So, and Fiat was, and Mazda both were very upfront on that. So about half of the development of that rear-wheel drive platform was borne by Fiat. And there was, it was all developed by Mazda, but Fiat helped pay the bills.
Funding, yeah.
The rear-wheel drive CX90 platform was initially designed supposedly to be shared with Lexus, but we don't know how much cash Toyota put on the fire. We do know that Toyota has some interest in Mazda. There's some investment there. There is some part sharing arrangement. So the hybrid in the CX50 is a Toyota hybrid system. They have a joint manufacturing facility in the United States. There is some cross patent sharing for emissions technology things. But the writing on the wall for Mazda has long been that if Mazda fails, the Japanese government really would like Toyota to buy Mazda. And I don't think Toyota wants to buy Mazda, so they're in this sort of like support them situation there. Toyota also has their fingers in Subaru. They own about 20% of Subaru. So it's like, there's a lot of things in the family. But I think that for Mazda, they had to differentiate themselves. If there was there's no question CX90's rear-wheel drive platform, CX60, 70, 80, 90, that is a make it or break it thing for Mazda, which is also why I think we don't see an actual CX70 in America. They couldn't afford to just make a new body, so they just took out some seats.
I mean, the risk involved is big, right? And you go, here's the move. Well, it's not. I don't even think this one's so much as Honda's extreme conservatism. It's Mazda's big risk on this, and we have not seen this pan out. We haven't seen if it's gonna make sense, if it's gonna, this is gonna be a many year out question.
Yeah.
I love to see it. The question is it gonna have been the right move? And even if it works and people enjoy it, was it worth the dollars? Does it differentiate enough?
I think I would go out on a limb and say I think it is worth the dollars, simply because without it, you would have another sales failure in CX9. CX9 honestly was a sales failure for Mazda, and that likely dragged the sales charts down and the financials down for a while. Even though it's heavily based on the other products and it had engines that were shared with the others, the body was unique, and it never sold in numbers that anyone could have supposed. Durango is ancient by comparison, but it outsold CX9 its entire life, and still sells better than any CX9 ever did. So I would argue that if they hadn't done this, then Mazda would just be a company selling a few MX-5s and the old CX-5, because CX-5 still sells really well. They tried replacing it. Well, I mean, it's so old, but they tried replacing it with CX-50, kind of, and then they tried to claim, oh, well, CX-50 doesn't replace CX-5, mainly because CX-5 still outsells CX-50.
Yeah,
even though CX-50 is newer, nicer,
et cetera. MX-5. As much as we might want it, you can't do it.
You can't do it. So I am more curious as to what comes next, because obviously, I have no basis for this speculation. Mind you, I have not been able to get any good rumors to confirm or deny this. I suspect that CX-70 should have actually been a smaller vehicle, and that plan got scrapped because of financial concerns. Right. Well, it was never meant to be CX-60. So CX-60 was designed to be, but smaller, like a reduced size version that actually had a different wheelbase and a different overall length, etc.
I've got an answer.
You do?
I've got their next product. You ready?
Okay, what is it?
Mazda PU70. It's the pickup. It's the plug-in hybrid pickup. Mazda's going to lead the charge. And it'll pair really nicely while towing your MX-5.
If Ford still owned Mazda, that would totally be on the books. That would totally be there.
There's an option.
This is an interesting question here. Coupled with that, though, Drew's asking, why not bring the CX-60 then? Great question. This is what I asked Mazda. Why does this exist when you literally have that thing over there that you could make over here? And the answer is not going to be happy for you. The answer mainly is the CX-60 was not designed for North American crash emissions or lighting standards, etc. So they would have to do more work for it than literally a different badge on CX90. So CX90 70, because it's exactly the same vehicle with same engine, same drivetrains, It does not have to get crash tested separately. It does not have to get emissions tested separately, etc. All that goes in. Headlight, taillight designs, nothing has to change. 60 would have had all of that, new everything's. This is an interesting question. This is actually really honestly more of a geopolitical question, I would say, because Chinese manufactured vehicles not in vogue, let's say right now, especially Chinese manufactured EVs. If a BYD seal were to come to the United States, depending on which tariff we're talking about, would either be a $50,000 car or it'd be more like a $35,000, $40,000 car. And at that point, it doesn't make much sense. But do you think those high tariffs are the right thing to do?
That's a tough one. If we take just a little bit of the geopolitical situation with China specifically, if we say, hey, do we protect our market from foreign markets? Maybe not, pro or con to the foreign market. I like competition. I like things being healthy competition, right? So if, just for example, if this BYD comes in untariffed and subsidized by the Chinese government in a way that other manufacturers aren't, that doesn't feel like a level playing field. Like it's like, hey, you're welcome to do that. That's all your choice. But
opaque
that doesn't
supply
feel
chains,
like a level
where
playing
does this where do things come from?
Exactly. So level playing field is important. Competition within level playing field is great. And I think that's where we're going to run into too many issues with something like the BYD. But I don't mind other options.
I would argue that at some level, inexpensive transportation can be an economic driver enough that the fears of competition are less important to the economy. And this is more of a tricky economic argument. Like, I would argue that if no manufacturer wants to have a sub $25,000 or sub $20,000 EV or any vehicle in the US, because in 2025 model year, there are only going to be, I believe it's going to be now 8 or 7 new vehicles that will be actually under $25,000 in the US, down from 12 last year. So pretty significant reduction.
R.I.P.
And this is all in, including the average sales tax, destination charges, etc. Like, sticker price might be low, but like, can you actually buy that thing for $25,000? It's solidly under 10. So I would argue that if a Chinese manufacturer could actually sell an EV in the US for under $20,000, that if it's under $20,000, we could have zero tariff on that. Because it's a market that's not being served by anybody. But the moment you're over that MSRP, you can have the tariff go through the roof however high you want. So 100% tariff on an EV, unless it's under $20,000, then it's 0% tariff. And the rationale there would be because you could have affordable transportation that people need to be able to get to their jobs. So as an economic concern, I want to be sure that I have an employee, a factory that has employees that can get to my factory, right? So if my factory's employees are all lower income earners, maybe they can't afford a $30,000 or $45,000 car, so they're driving old cars that maybe are unreliable and they miss days at work, and this puts their job in peril. So that puts the economy in peril because they can't get to their job. But if you can have new, affordable, dependable transportation, and you could have guidelines around it where you say, oh, you want to sell that cheap car? Okay, you have to have minimum warranty standards, minimum durability standards, and it has to be cheap, like cheap. Then that actually could be a bigger benefit to our domestic economy than the ostensible loss of, this non-existent cheap car that nobody else is building here. That's my
curveball that we shouldn't go too far into. What if the potential losses to our own economy and just in our domestic manufacturing, et cetera, that would be hit by this ultra competitive under $20,000 vehicle? What if we did the math and then instead put that money, that potential loss, back into infrastructure and public transportation?
Yeah, I mean,
I'd be curious to see the numbers.
It'd be intriguing. Public transportation is never going to get me off of this hill to my office, because that would be very
not with that attitude.
Very unaffordable. I demand my own subway stop, but they can't dig it right under my house because don't want to fall into the
Yeah.
sea.
Right.
Let's move along to our last super chat here. Thanks for that, Red Star. And I think this will probably end our live stream episode of the day. This is a good one. Do you think Elon Musk's political activism could potentially take Tesla the route of Mike Lindell and My Pillow? Do you think his activism could inject toxicity into the Tesla brand? I don't think we have to think about that. I'm pretty sure it has already happened.
Yeah. We are talking about two very different products, a Tesla and a My Pillow. But yes, I think we're seeing that. But the other side of it is that consumers who are worried about these sort of things, and Red Star, if you're asking this question, I think you are more the exception than the rule. I don't think people make all of their purchasing decisions based on the moral compass or political leanings of their C-suite. However, Elon Musk is way more public than most C-suite individuals, so there's going to be more overlap. There's going to be more, bleed into the effects on the product. But I think we're seeing it.
Yeah, I mean, we'll say Tesla did sell. Looks like their sales are down 13 to 15%, depending on which analysis you're looking at. Apparently, year-on-year sales in California, let me clarify here, year-on-year sales last month in California were down nearly 24% in the second quarter. So that's a pretty big drop. Fortune just recently
for those
had
who don't
an
know, California
is
a pretty big market.
biggest auto market in the U.S., biggest market by far for Tesla, and their sales are down, according to Fortune magazine, 24% for the second quarter of this year. So it's a pretty big drop in a pretty solid market for them. I will say that the one question we cannot answer is, why is that a drop? Is it a drop because the Model 3 got a refresh and nobody's buying a sedan, but the Model Y is 4 years old and kind of old looking now, and there's some cooler stuff out there? Is it because
competition is probably part of that answer, right?
Is it because they have
the Model X not selling as much because the EV9 is now available? And
exactly, like we don't have answers to that question, so it's impossible to separate the one from the other. We do know that whenever they are not choosing Tesla, they are still choosing an EV. So that is definitely still the case. So EV sales are up, but we see a pretty dramatic shift actually towards the non-Tesla EVs. So the whole segment is growing, but Tesla's market share is dropping quite rapidly in their established markets. I would say this is definitely a little bit of the classic marketing advice that you don't bite the hand that feeds you. So if Elon had any political view at all, and he was a smart CEO, let me just phrase that carefully, perhaps. Maybe if he was a ingenious CEO, whatever, he would have kept his opinion to himself, right? If you're like, my particular attitude on, I don't know, on iPhones would cause, and I'm the CEO of Apple, and I think iPhone shoppers are dumb as bricks. Like, these people are bottom-dwelling people, and they're just like, holy shit, why are these slugs buying my product? Thank God they're so stupid they're buying things. And you know what, you Android people? Maybe you agree. Travis owns an Android. He might be nodding his head secretly.
I'm not saying a darn thing.
But you know what? If I was Tim Cook, I would keep my mouth shut. And that's what Elon didn't do, was like...
The alternative is buy one of the largest social media platforms and then treat it as your own stream of consciousness. We all make choices.
Too, right? I would have argued that if Elon's actual mission was further development of EVs, reduce emissions, do great things for the planet, not be evil, whatever else he wants to say he's into, then he could have used his money in so many different ways, right? He could have made the affordable Tesla rather than the stupid self-driving Tesla. He could have said, well, you know what? Instead of going to space, we're going to spend money on reducing emissions in the U.S. in other ways. He could have,
Improving agricultural
started an electric
practices
airplane company, right, or a hydrogen airplane company, something like that. He could have bought Boeing and fixed Boeing, so that way doors
do rail that doesn't have to be underground.
Yeah, I mean, say what you will about Teslas. Generally, their doors don't blow out in the middle of the road, right? So that's could have maybe he could have done
Fingers
that.
crossed on that one.
So anyway, those are my thoughts. What are your thoughts there?
No, I'm with you. That's I'm with you. We were in that one together.
Are you selling your Model 3 in protest?
I'm not selling my Model.
You could buy a lovely slow charging Blazer.
BYD seal. I'll tell you what though. What's on a pretty good deal right now is Polestar 2s.
Polestar 2s are pretty cheap. They're a little small though.
Well, I don't mind. For what it's worth, it can be very, very expensive to be a conscious consumer.
Mm-hmm.
And I may not be flush enough to go with the whims of an ever-changing political climate.
Yep. I promised that was the end, but maybe we'll make this the end since you said Polestar 2. So this is the question of Polestar 2 or automatic Miata. Sorry it took us an hour to get to your question. Did see it there at the top, though. What's more fun, Polestar 2 or automatic Miata?
Oh, God, that is such a difficult question to answer, sort of.
I agree.
Oh, boy.
I don't like the automatic Miata.
No, but here's the thing. If we're talking, the question is how fun. And top-down driving in non-rainy weather is a lot of fun. So
yeah.
But also the Polestar 2 is a nice car, and it drives well.
And the slowest Polestar 2 was never as slow as the fastest Miata.
No, but speed does not determine fun.
Depends on your definition of fun, like you just said.
Yeah, no, I get that. I am. We're gonna end this way on a pickle. Oh boy. I would never consider buying an automatic Miata, so that one's hard for me to wrap my head around.
And statistically, if it's an automatic Miata, not only is it an automatic Miata, it's probably a hardtop Miata.
Right, which is even slower. And I actually don't fit in a hardtop Miata. Too much height in the seat.
Yeah. Because if I recall my numbers correctly here, most of the hardtop Miatas are sold as automatics, and most of the automatics in the Miata lineup are hardtops. And Miata's been skewing super hard towards automatic and hardtop lately. Like the sales trajectory, I should say, is definitely going that way. That's what customers want.
Well, new car buyers are getting younger, obviously, so they want their soft top manuals.
Wow. If we cannot pick the manual Miata, then I mean, it's already so sad. Why would you not just get the Polestar? Just get some back seats and a hatch.
I'd probably lean towards a Polestar because I think I'd be sad every time I got in the Miata and couldn't shift my gears.
Yeah, I mean, it's like by the time you already have one cat and you're a childless cat lady, you might as well just collect a dozen, right? And I say that with my cat right there next to me in the seat, and she is adorable.
Mine is also here. I think both of ours could be heard meowing.
I mean, you might as well just have 6, right? Just go down. It's like by the time you've automatic to your Miata, you might as well just go all the way down to a 5-door hatch, right?
Which, by the way, let me be on record, not dissing anyone who chose the automatic Miata, but that life is not for me. And so I think I have to go Polestar.
You might not judge them, but I will.
That's fine.
I'm sorry. I will judge the automatic Miata shopper. Limited exceptions. Like if you live in a really hilly area, okay, maybe. But oddly enough, when I used to work nearer to San Francisco, I always thought it was hilarious that, I kid you not, every single employee that actually lived in San Francisco had a manual transmission car, and the people that commuted much less distance had automatics. The people that were living on the steep streets, they all had manuals.
And that's before like hill start assist being standard on manuals. When you actually had to do the thing. Now you don't have to. It's not nearly as
Oh,
difficult.
Garrett's arguing here, or questioning here.
Okay.
I would argue that the Miata is not a sports car; it is a sporty car because
absolutely.
Because it is not fast, nor does it handle exceptionally well, but it's a lot of fun. And fun does not beget sports in my brain, unless.
So I mentioned,
unless a Camry can be a sports car.
Earlier today, we were talking, and I said my first new car was a Scion FRS. And I call it my little yellow sports car. But in no way do I think it was a sports car. It was a sporty car. Absolutely. It leaned sporty in every aspect of it. It wasn't fast. It didn't handle particularly well. I mean, it's very well balanced, right? But its grip number was low. But it's a sporty car. Miata's a sporty car. V6 Camry, quick, not a sporty car.
Yeah. The comeback here is one of the most popular cars in motorsports, which is definitely true. Although Miata Cup races don't look like the Miata you buy out there. They handle better. They're still wicked slow, though. I
don't tell them that.
I actually think that Miata Cup races are fantastic, and they're the only races that I am interested in watching at all. Not that long ago, no, it is actually long ago. Like there was this Porsche sponsored thing at Laguna Seca, and of course Mazda, the title sponsor thing there. So Mazda was everywhere, and they had the Mazda Cup races at Laguna Seca, and the two most interesting races for me were the 911 Cup races, depending on the category, and the Miata ones, because the Miatas, it's all about driver skill. They are so impossibly slow that they cannot go fast enough to do stupid things on the track. So most of
those cars are trying so hard.
Most of the time, you have this little pack of angry bees, and they're all just buzzing down the track, and they're all so close to one another because none of them have the power to do anything. So they're all just right on top of each other, buzzing. They're all shifting at exactly the same time. It's hilarious. So you just this whole squadron of bees shifts at the exact same moment, except one.
There's a moment where you could hear,
except one, and that one just lost the race. Because they didn't get it right, and that one, then you can see, then they're slow. The pack is pulling, and the rest of they're not. The formation kind of changes, and the 911
it's the movie
races,
you watch it fall away because none of it happens fast.
The Porsche races are fun because they start spinning and split from the pack for no apparent reason. So like they're just doing whatever on the track, and all of a sudden you're like, why is that one in the kitty litter? They're just spinning and spinning and spinning. Like, that's weird. Maybe is it because the engine's in the wrong place? I don't know. Is that maybe has something to do with it? But yeah, those are the two fun ones for me at any rate. And Josh, that is totally correct. The Miata is the spiritual successor to the British sports car kind of thing. Although in many markets, they were also accused of not being sports cars, and hence the origin of the argument.
Okay, I have one just real quick. All the rumor mill says the Miata is getting hybridized. If that's the case, can it be a manual? We have seen manual hybrids before, but very few, and not
can
successfully. Well, but I just mean historically, we haven't seen that be incredibly successful.
Right.
If we see the hybridized Miata, does it mean the end of the manual Miata, or will it sell it without the hybrid option there?
I would assume it would be without.
Or do they come out with one engine?
My guess would be that Mazda is going to be cheap, and they're going to just jam the transmission from the CX-90 in there to try and help amortize costs. I don't know whether it's small enough to fit. The transmission in the Miata is relatively small. It's an Aisin currently.
Right.
There's part of the Toyota involvement in this deal with Mazda, and so it is a relatively small transmission. If the 8-speed could fit, that's a possibility. And it might be because it has a very small bell housing, since it was never designed to have a torque converter. How much of that 8-speed is Aisin and how much is Mazda, we don't know. Mazda says it is 100% designed in-house. I think they are just telling tales. We don't know for sure. But I would assume that if there's a hybrid Miata, that will be its course, and it will be a very mild hybrid with a small battery, and so it will feel more like a traditional automatic, albeit faster shifting. I don't know about the manual though. I mean, they could be like a Honda IMA system. There's no reason they couldn't hybridize it.
Right. The CRZ, you know.
The question is, would it be enough of an emissions reduction and fuel economy improvement to justify the cost of it, and still to comply? Because that is the one tricky thing for manual transmissions in some world markets, is emissions compliance with manuals is kind of hard, because you can't guarantee what gear the vehicle will be in at a particular speed, so those emissions profiles get off here and there. And they're not as efficient. Modern manuals are not as efficient as modern automatics.
Right.
So that's kind of a tricky one. Mazda has been super dedicated to the manual though. So if anybody could do it, they could.
Yeah, like I said, I'd love to see it. But it's a small fear. It's a small fear.
I mean, my personal bet would be that Mazda will give up the manual transmission later than Honda or BMW. BMW and Honda, I think, will fall first.
Honda's held strong, not in all
Honda
products.
Has held strong so far. Yeah. Only two left. Only two left, though. Actually, only one left, really, because it's two different versions of the one. So
yeah.
And indeed. With that, we will end the live stream. So everybody have a good weekend, and we will see you next week. Be sure and check out our new updated podcast if you have not already checked that out. That's going to be coming up on the podcast channel, as well as your favorite podcast platform. So it actually has been a complete year. We've looked it up. It's been a year since we did our last podcast, but it is coming back. And it's coming back with viewer comment and feedback and voice text messages, blah, blah, blah.
So watch it, listen, let us know what you think.
Yeah. And be sure and check out the EV Buyer's Guide channel, where we have a whole lot on the drama from Edmunds and how they're reporting on Tesla trade-ins is kind of quirky. So, see you later.